Gorsuch. I mean, this is really, it's so true, everything that he said, but it's really alarming to think that, this is the kind of stuff that can happen on a breathtaking scale when you have that much fear in society. So in this statement, he gave examples of how authorities surveilled church parking lots, recorded license plates, and issued notices warning that attendance at even outdoor services satisfying all state social distancing and hygiene requirements could amount to criminal conduct. He went on to explain how federal executive officials entered the act too through vaccine mandates, which included threats of dismissal for employees and service members who refused. Along the way, he writes, it seems federal officials may have pressured social media companies to suppress information about pandemic policies with which they disagreed. Yeah. Emergency decrees were issued at a, quote, furious pace while Congress and state legislators fell too silent, he said. The statement was actually part of this whole Title 42 public health emergency policy, so they had to roll that back. And a lot of states were like, hey, don't roll it back. And he was making the point that, we don't really have the authority to do that. And by the way, let's talk about this authority. I want to go back to his writing here because this was just so important for anybody who's freedom-minded. He wrote, many lessons can be learned from this chapter in our history, and hopefully serious efforts will be made to study it. One lesson might be this: fear and the desire for safety are powerful forces. They can lead to a clamor for action, almost any action, as long as someone does something to address a perceived threat. A leader or an expert who claims he can fix everything if only we do exactly as he says, can prove an irresistible force. Make no mistake, he concluded, decisive executive action is sometimes necessary and appropriate. But if emergency decrees promise to solve some problems, they threaten to generate others. And rule by indefinite emergency edict risks leaving us all with a shell of a democracy and civil liberties just as hollow. Well said, Mr. Gorsuch. Well said. I mean, it's alarming in that you can see how fast and furious those things kick in. And you can see how somebody like Fauci suddenly became the be-all, end-all. And he was like, achieving godlike status among the liberal media because he was going to somehow save us from everything. Ultimately, and you can go to a number of studies, what we learned was that there was not actually a huge reduction in COVID mortality as a result of those shutdowns. In fact, one study here found that it reduced COVID mortality by 3% in the UK, US, and Europe in the year 2020. This is a study by Johns Hopkins University. And then there was a study out of Sweden, as well as a Danish think tank called the Center for Political Studies that suggested that, in fact, no, there was no huge benefit to these lockdowns. Official data, of course, shows that the US did suffer more deaths than usual as a result of the pandemic, but that they could not be attributed to COVID because what happened? People didn't go and get the necessary care that they otherwise would have gotten because their whole lives were upended. Everything was shut down. All the sort of, care that you would go and get for preemptive health reasons, you couldn't get, right? Like you couldn't go to the doctor. So consequently, there were people that died of other things, and not to mention the mental health crisis, which is still taking its toll on our society. Not to mention what we did to our kids. They will forever be behind because they weren't in school for that long. So all of this stuff we need to think about. We need to think about long and hard because we can't have that happen again. I mean, I think that that's the biggest warning to all of us. We need to be able to voice our own opinions. We need to be able to make sure that we have lawmakers there that are diverse in their opinions and that don't go into this group thought with a, okay, thank you, Fauci, whatever you say mentality. Fauci, who had no interest in talking to economists or mental health experts, he had one lane and one lane only. And we paid the price for it in many, many, many ways.